On the 1st of September 1959, in the little country town of Brisbane, the Queensland Council of Social Service was born. Since then, QCOSS has worked to promote social justice and to provide a voice for Queenslanders affected by poverty and inequality. QCOSS has now got over 600 members, and this means it's got a loud voice. Life member Vera Rayner remembers the early years when agencies came together to lay the foundations for what QCOSS is today.
Many years before QCOSS, there was a council of social agencies, a place where the different agencies could come together to discuss what was happening. The Council of Social Agencies lapsed, and it was some years before two agencies, the Queensland Wattle League and the Queensland Council of the Australian Association of Social Workers, Queensland branch, both started working to establish a council. There were preliminary meetings about this, and then a public meeting was held at which the decision was made that the council would be established. I remember one meeting at the City Hall, and that is probably the meeting when it was established. All the agencies were invited to attend.
At the inaugural council meeting, the first president, Justice Wainstorm, made an impassioned speech advocating preventative work to reduce the number of children coming before the courts. The earliest constitution adopted by QCOSS contained objectives including the promotion of cooperation between social service and other social welfare agencies, the encouragement of the interchange and dissemination of ideas. Throughout the 1960s, the council operated with only minimal funding from government.
The Queensland government was approached to ask for some kind of a payment to be made, but that was not forthcoming.
Despite funding limitations, the council became well established during the 1960s. During this period, QCOSS's research and advocacy work was done by volunteers through standing committees. Some of the issues that concerned them included child protection, the needs of children in residential care, and the financial problems faced by deserted wives. The 1970s saw the rise of activism in the sector and society as a whole, even in National Party-led Queensland. Increased state government funding in 1974 coincided with the introduction of federal funding for the QCOSS. For the first time, QCOSS could employ a professional director and other staff. New director Anthony Kelly's arrival at QCOSS coincided with the Brisbane floods, thrusting him into a role in emergency response coordination. One of Tony's challenges at the time was working with a coalition government led by Joe Bjelke-Petersen.
One of the outstanding characteristics at the state level at that time was the underground evidence, but overwhelming evidence in my view, of institutional abuse of people, both by the state and by the church. But it was extraordinarily difficult to transact any sort of honest dialogue with the government that had so much to lose about those issues. I was successful at one level of being able to meet the minister probably about once a week. I don't know, but I think I would still hold the record of having as many meetings with a minister as any director has ever had. But none of the requests or submissions or delegations that I brought to his attention were ever successful.
In 1977, QCOSS lost federal government funding, forcing it to cut staff and sell assets. Board minutes report QCOSS sold off an executive swivel chair, desk and calculator at cost price to free up cash. Very soon afterwards, state government funding was also slashed. Labor's rise to power at federal government level gave QCOSS a chance to rebuild.
I guess it was in the early 80s and things were starting to happen in the community sector. The federal Labor government, the Hawke government, had come in and was rolling out rather large nationwide programs such as the SAP program, supported accommodation, and was setting up networks of regional organisations for consultation with the federal government.
A breakthrough came with the allocation of state and federal funding for an emergency relief program in 1983. Coralie Kingston joined QCOSS to work on this project. sharing an office with the 139 Club.
My first role with QCOSS was as a project officer. I was employed to undertake a survey of emergency relief in Queensland. Prior to that, QCOSS had fallen foul of the government because it had publicly criticised the funding of the community services sector, and the government didn't take very kindly to that. So it went into a bit of a hiatus period, and this project, the emergency relief project, was an attempt by the board at the time to resurrect QCOSS's stocks.
From 1985 to 1990, Director Jackie Byrne managed to navigate the Conservative state government to improve QCOSS's position and influence. QCOSS supported establishment of specialist peaks including Queensland Shelter, Queensland Community Housing Coalition and the Queensland Disability Advisory Council in the 1980s. In 1987, the Childcare Management and Training Support Unit began working with childcare providers. This was the beginning of work in childcare management and support for QCOSS that continues today with the Indigenous Professional Support Unit. The election of the GOSS Labor government in 1989, the first Labor government in more than 30 years, meant that the sector had to learn to play the game of working with government very differently.
In '93, we produced the first serious, pre-budget submission to the Queensland government. One of the things that I'm probably most proud of is the work that I did with Coralie Kingston and others on Drawing the Line on Poverty, the Queensland Poverty Research Project.
Drawing the Line on Poverty, where Coralie Kingston and Peter Walsh and myself, because I used to do all the desktop publishing for all the publications within QCOSS, worked till really late at night. So this particular evening we're working till all hours and to finish this, and Peter wanted to go home, and I actually said to him, no, you can't go till it's finished, because then tomorrow is due to go to the printer. So we did.
We had a massive amount of media exposure from Cairns through to Melbourne. Of course, it was all to no avail when in 1996 the government changed with the by-election in Mundingburra, and the Borbidge-led coalition government came into power. But the other important thing that we did was we, for the first time, I think, in QCOSS's history, engaged a media consultant who could work with us to maximise the media clout, if you like, from the report. So we were subsequently invited to meet with senior bureaucrats in Premier and across other departments to help shape and fashion the government's response to this report, which was the Community Renewal and Local Jobs Program.
Peter Walsh recounts the infamous story about how he fell out of favour when he refused Liberal MP Denver Beanland the floor at a public meeting he was chairing.
And of course I was emceeing the whole event, introducing candidates and basically moderating, if you like, the discussion. And I was at the podium and on stage, and I said, "Excuse me, Mr Beanland, I'm afraid you're not the candidate for the Liberal Party in Mundingburra. You will not be answering any questions. The candidate for Mundingburra is John Tanti, and all questions will be answered by him." It was quite a crazy time, and of course he went on to win, and the Borbidge government formed government shortly afterwards with the support of Liz Cunningham.
There have been some interesting times. I remember prior to a state election in the mid-90s where QCOSS was challenging government, and it was on the poverty report that QCOSS had done some work on, and government was pretty scratchy about having a report highlighting the difficulties people were facing just prior to an election. But QCOSS was respected for its work and the credibility of its work. One of the great things in our democracy is that the non-government sector can advocate for its members, and in doing that challenge government and criticise government. At QCOSS and through our work with ACOSS, we were covering taxation policy, health policy, employment policy. So I found that work at QCOSS really important in the work that I do now.
Poverty has continued to be a focus for QCOSS, and early in the 2000s, QCOSS ran the Fair Queensland campaign. As part of this campaign, a 2003 report card on housing services was described as a packapoo ticket that should be put into the rubbish bin immediately by then Housing Minister Robert Schwarten. In recent times, the sector has united to form the Futures Forum and to work on the Queensland Compact.
The Compact has been a really important outcome which QCOSS invested in. We funded the worker to support the development of the compact, the Community Futures Forum was formed, and it was that forum that negotiated the compact.
Despite Queensland's economic growth, poverty and disadvantage remain. QCOSS continues to highlight these issues and push for responses, including prevention and early intervention, and there are some signs of success.
We have convinced the Treasurer to include in his budget a considerable amount of money to invest in services that are preventative, essentially. I mean, there's been huge investments in crisis services. We're really successful in working alongside the unions and employers to get a very substantial increase in wages for the community sector.
A partnership approach was fundamental to the success of the Good Work, Decent Wages campaign and subsequent state budget funding increase.
I think the fact that the government has provided the finance to establish them and help them to employ staff to work in different areas of need is an illustration that the government values the work they're doing.
The history of QCOSS has been about building a strong sort of organised sector over the last 50 years. It's been about saying we're not going to get very far if we just work as individual services. If we form together into this sort of council of social service, we're going to have a much bigger voice, and I think QCOSS has demonstrated that over the years. And I'd like to think that in the future we have arguments that are so sound, that are so well researched, that any government that's in power will be unable to resist it. I know they'll bring a different ideology to it, and they'll bring sort of different messages and different flavours.
Queensland's Indigenous agencies are now establishing a peak body, the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Human Services Coalition, with support from QCOSS.
I see that the Indigenous issues are being taken on more, and I think it will roll on more, which is great. And also working within the IPSU team, I feel that we have a good team, a lot of experience.
Across 50 years, my growing up, QCOSS has made an outstanding contribution to Queensland. I have the greatest admiration and respect for what it does, what it stands for, the way that QCOSS keeps on the agenda of this state.
Both QCOSS and the community services sector in Queensland are now respected professionals that support Queenslanders in need every day. And QCOSS hasn't needed to sell a swivel chair or calculator in years.